Hi, it's me again. For over a century, the BBC has been woven into British life. But the BBC we see today, embroiled in scandal, accused of bias and losing public trust, looks very different from the institution it was created to be. To understand the BBC's fall, we have to start at the beginning. And it was founded in 1922 as the British Broadcasting Company, and in 1927 it became the British Broadcasting Corporation under a royal charter. Its first leader, John Reith, set out its mission to inform, educate and entertain. But Reith's vision went deeper than a slogan. He believed broadcasting should serve the whole nation, not just elites, remain independent from both government and commercial influence, uphold high moral and cultural standards, provide impartial, balanced news, and avoid sensationalism and political manipulation. To protect this independence, the government adopted a licence fee funding model, so there didn't need to be any advertising. The BBC was to be a universal, public service broadcaster funded by the people for the people, and there would be no government interference. That was the promise. But over the last 4 decades, scandal after scandal has chipped away at those founding principles. The BBC's Director Generals are supposed to be guardians of Reith's ideals. Yet the last 4 decades show a pattern of crisis management rather than principled leadership. John Britt, from 1992 to 2000, introduced internal markets and bureaucracy that many said damaged creativity. Greg Dyke, from 2000 to 2004, was a former Labour donor, and he fuelled accusations of political alignment. Mark Thompson, from 2004 to 2012, oversaw digital expansion, but faced repeated impartiality complaints. George Entwistle, 2012, resigned after 54 days due to Newsnight failures. And Tony Hall, from 2013 to 2020, attempted stabilisation, but the Bashir scandal resurfaced under his watch. Tim Davie, 2020 to present, promised impartiality reforms amid new controversies. But instead of stability, the BBC has cycled through leaders reacting to crises, each one eroding the corporation's credibility. Now let's examine some of the scandals that directly contradict the BBC's founding values. One of the most well known was Jimmy Savile. Reith believed the BBC should uphold the highest moral standards. The Savile scandal exposed the opposite. For decades, Savile abused children while working at the BBC. Warnings were missed, rumours were ignored. The culture of deference and silence allowed a predator to thrive. Then came the editorial disaster. Newsnight investigated Savile in 2011. The investigation was dropped. The BBC aired glowing tributes instead. And this wasn't just a failure of journalism. It was a failure of duty, morality and public trust, the very pillars the BBC was built on. Then there was Newsnight's false accusation in 2012. Reith demanded accuracy and impartiality, yet Newsnight broadcast a report implying a senior Conservative figure was a child abuser without proper verification. The allegation was false. The BBC apologised. Director General George Entwistle resigned after just 54 days. This scandal showed a newsroom willing to air explosive claims without meeting its own ethical standards. Then there was the Bashir Princess Diana interview in 1995. Martin Bashir secured the famous Diana interview using forged documents and deceit. The BBC failed to investigate concerns at the time. A 2021 inquiry concluded the BBC had breached its own editorial rules and then covered up the misconduct. This was the opposite of Reith's vision of integrity and honesty. Then there was Cliff Richard privacy breach. when the BBC filmed a police raid on Cliff Richard's home using a helicopter and broadcast it live. A court ruled it was a serious invasion of privacy, and the BBC paid damages. Again, sensationalism trumped responsibility, contradicting the BBC's founding purpose. Then there was the case of Hugh Edwards. 2023 to 24, one of the BBC's most recognisable presenters was later charged with offences involving indecent images of children. The scandal raised questions about how complaints were handled, what the BBC knew, and whether the safeguarding processes were adequate. Reith's BBC was supposed to be a moral leader. Instead, the corporation appeared unable to police its own stars. Then there was the Gaza documentary scandal, a breach of transparency and impartiality. In 2024, the BBC broadcast a documentary titled Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. It was narrated by a 13-year-old boy living in Gaza, a powerful storytelling choice. But the BBC failed to disclose that the narrator's father was a senior Hamas official. Viewers were told nothing. The BBC admitted it had breached its own editorial guidelines, apologised and removed the programme. This was a clear violation of Reith's sacred principles: transparency, impartiality and independence from political actors. The BBC's charter demands strict political neutrality, yet accusations of bias have become one of the corporation's biggest reputational wounds. And remarkably, the pressure didn't only come from outside. Even inside the BBC's own leadership, the principle of impartiality was challenged. Former Director General Greg Dyke, who led the BBC from 2000 to 2004, openly argued that the corporation should not be bound by strict neutrality. He described impartiality rules as restrictive, unrealistic, and a barrier to the BBC taking stronger positions on issues of public interest. Dyke even pushed for changes to the BBC's charter that would have loosened its legal duty to remain politically neutral, a stance that shocked politicians and contradicted the very principles the BBC was founded on. When the BBC's own leadership begins questioning impartiality, it becomes harder to dismiss accusations of bias. Some critics claim the BBC has a metropolitan liberal worldview, that they will remain leaning during Brexit, that they have a tendency to platform left-leaning commentators, and that there is a history of senior figures with Labour ties. Others argue the BBC is too close to the government, influenced by the fact the government sets a licence fee, and so reluctant to challenge the ruling party. With these claims becoming louder, they undermine the BBC's image as a neutral broadcaster. One of the most recent controversies involves BBC coverage of Donald Trump. The BBC aired an edited clip of Trump's remarks from the original speech delivered in early 2021 in the heated aftermath of the 2020 US election. Trump made a mixture of forceful claims about the election and calls for supporters to march to the Capitol and peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard. But in the BBC's edited version, the segment highlighted Trump's more confrontational language, but did not include the peacefully and patriotically line. The BBC said the edit was made for length and clarity. Critics argued that removing that line changed the tone of the speech and risked appearing politically selective. President Trump has said he will sue, and I believe the process has started. The incident has become part of a growing pattern of editorial missteps that have steadily eroded trust in the corporation. By November 2025, after years of criticism, political scrutiny and renewed debate around BBC News, both Tim Davie and Deborah Turness announced they would step down. Their resignations marked the most significant leadership upheaval at the BBC in over a decade. But the instability didn't end there. As of now, February 2026, Tim Davie remains in post because the BBC has not yet appointed a successor. No final departure date has been announced, and the corporation is still in a transitional phase, a sign of just how unsettled the BBC's leadership has become. The BBC's funding model was designed to ensure independence, but it only works if the public believes the BBC is independent and impartial. According to the BBC's own annual reporting, the number of licences in force has seen a net decline of around 400,000 in the last year. Younger audiences are turning to streaming and others are cancelling as a form of protest. The trend is steadily downwards. When the public walks away, the model collapses. The BBC was founded on noble principles: inform, educate, entertain, remain impartial, serve the whole nation, uphold moral standards. But the last 30 years tell a different story. Scandals that betrayed public trust, editorial failures that undermined credibility, accusations of political bias, and a culture that failed to protect the vulnerable, and a funding model which was losing public support. Leadership instability at the very top. The BBC's fall isn't about just one scandal. It's about a century-old institution drifting further and further from the values that it was originally built upon. Even some of their good, highly profitable programmes in recent times have not been without controversy. Top Gear's Jeremy Clarkson had long criticised BBC executives for what he saw as excessive political correctness, constant interference with Top Gear's creative freedom, and a management culture he felt was overly bureaucratic. Tensions built for years, but everything collapsed after Clarkson physically confronted a producer in 2015, leading the BBC to end his contract. With the trio's chemistry central to the show, Richard Hammond and James May chose to walk away as well, and it marked the end of Top Gear's most successful era. And the long-running programme, Doctor Who, once a favourite of children everywhere, was accused of becoming too woke during the Jodie Whittaker, Chris Chibnall era, 2018 to 2022. Storylines became more involved with identity, race or morality, and there were perceived changes in tone compared to earlier series. These reactions came from a mixture of fans, critics and political commentators. Ratings and viewing figures fell. In my view, the BBC used to be the channel everyone believed and upheld as truthful and impartial. Now it's the exact opposite. I cancelled my TV licence some time ago as I refused to watch it or pay for it any longer. I refuse to pay for an organisation that, in my opinion, lies, misleads and pushes its own agenda of woke messages. It's my belief that the public should no longer fund the BBC as it has not upheld its original purpose or promise. For an organisation that once produced some of the most iconic programmes of all time, those in charge during its demise should hang their heads in shame. The BBC, in my view, is beyond saving. Even now, it fails to report on newsworthy issues if they don't fit its narrative, such as Rupert Lowe's and Restore Britain's rape gang inquiry, currently taking place in London. And people magically seem to disappear from television if they don't agree with the BBC's narrative, such as David Bellamy, who dared to suggest that climate change may not be man-made. And comics seem to be cancelled overnight if the BBC don't like their political stance, such as Andrew Lawrence, who was once a regular comic on BBC shows like Alive at the Apollo. And what about other mainstream media like ITV, Channel 4 and 5? Well, it seems to me that they're almost as bad, but at least we don't fund them. Or do we? Because Without a TV licence, you're not able to watch these programmes live, only on catch-up. So I'm not sure whether they're funded by the licence fee or not. And if not, why can't we watch them live without a licence? I always thought their funding came from adverts. It's all as clear as mud, isn't it? Certainly nothing seems to be transparent, and as usual, no one seems to be accountable. Reith's original vision for the BBC was brilliant and inspiring, and for a while the reality was too, until the long dark descent started 40 odd years ago. For someone like me that remembers watching Bill and Ben sat on my mum's lap, Dixon of Dock Green sat on Dad's knee, Doctor Who and the Daleks from behind the sofa, and later laughing with the family at Dad's Army, 40 Towers and Only Fools and Horses, well, it's nothing short of a crying shame. Let me know in the comments whether you're still watching and whether you think there's any chance the BBC can continue as a publicly funded organisation. Join me for my next video when I'll be talking about Labour's house building policy and the new housing estates which appear to be springing up everywhere across our once green and pleasant land. Please subscribe. In the meantime, remember, you're not alone. Bye for now.